described in the Temple of Apollo in ancient Greece and are thought to capture the essence of wisdom. But what does it mean to know? And what is thyself? My youngest kids are 5 years old, and they like those connect the dots puzzles, where you start drawing a 1 and you go to 2 and 3 and so on. You see their eyes light up as they connect enough dots that suddenly the picture emerges, and they're like, oh, it's a kitty. Where just a few minutes before, it was just meaningless dots. So all of us have problems. We have problems at the individual level: depression, anxiety, feeling loved, paying our bills, finding out what this TED Talk was. We have societal problems: poverty, war, prejudice, violence. And we have civilizational problems that are impending, particularly climate change and the ongoing collapse of biodiversity around the world. All of these problems, all of them, from the personal to the societal to the civilizational, result from an inability to connect the dots. So this is what I want to talk about. Know thyself. What is knowing? You think you know what knowing is. Knowing, thinking, mind, awareness. We're doing it all the time. You're knowing right now something. But as you start to shift levels of scale, shift outside of your normal level of self-awareness, things become a lot more mysterious. Shift down to the millisecond level of time scale, and consider what knowing or thinking or mind is at that level. At that level, mind occurs in the brain. The brain is an intricate network of about 100 billion neurons. Each one is connected to about 1,000 to 10,000 other neurons. And at the millisecond level of time scale, what thinking is the transmission of chemicals across a whole vast web of synapses. Right? The sloshing of chemicals called neurotransmitters through the brain. And that's what thinking is. All of our thoughts, sloshing chemicals. Go up a level of time scale to maybe dozens to hundreds of milliseconds. And you start to see the brain functioning as a whole. You see different brain areas getting activated and lighting up, so to speak. Sloshing chemicals within their own brain areas, and then taking that information and transmitting it to other brain areas. So that when you feel fear, when you feel pleasure, when you make a decision, when you ponder the meaning of life, when you see, all of this requires the integration of many different brain areas. So your mind is chemicals. Mind is brain areas. Mind is the integration of all of these communication systems. Then scale up a little bit more. Think about your emotions. Where do your emotions come from? In many ways, your emotions come from other people. Moment by moment, your emotions are often transmitted to you by other people. You say you're walking down the street and someone is feeling happy and they smile. You see this, you smile back, you feel happy. They transmitted their happiness to you. Researchers like Nicholas Christakis have shown how emotions get transmitted through our social networks. They ripple out so that your emotions influence your friend's emotions and your friend's friend's emotions and your friend's 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 emotions. So that one person's emotions ripple out through a vast network of social communication. It's kind of like the brain. It's a mind. It's just operating at a different time and space scale. Our emotional systems are built largely from other people as well. Right? As infants, we're responsive to emotional input within the first couple of months of life. And by the time we're about a year old, we started to, or even a little bit earlier, we started to develop our basic sense of security or insecurity, which, all else being equal, will be with us for the rest of our lives, conditioning how we see things, how we engage in relationships, how confident we are, how able we are to achieve our goals, and many other things. So that when you're 30, 40, 50 years old, and you're trying to make your relationships work, you're running through patterns that were sort of downloaded into you, possibly in the first years of your life. So mind is other people. Think of the body. Your mind is connected to your body. When you feel aroused, changes your thinking, changes your attention, and changes many things. How does the body function? Well, as we heard a little bit about today, the body functions based on food and water. Right? We know now, this is really fascinating to me, that research in the area of functional medicine has shown that many of the things that we thought of as mental disorders, depression, anxiety, attention deficit disorders, autism, they are not exclusively mental disorders. They are both social disorders and or physical disorders. You can treat many of these mental disorders just as effectively through nutritional changes as you can through psychopharmacological treatments. Because nutrition, forms the building blocks, the basic amino acids and vitamins and nutrients and everything like that, that neurotransmitters are synthesized out of. If you don't have the right nutrition, if you're eating a lot of unhealthy things like sugar, and you're not eating enough healthy things like fresh vegetables that contain amino acids and vitamins, then your body systems aren't working properly, and therefore your brain systems aren't working properly. And this manifests as mental or psychological disorders. So your mind is food. But what determines the kind of food that we eat? Lots of things do. Our culture does, our parents do, commercials do, how food is arranged on store shelves, government policies that determine the pricing of food. All of these things determine the food that we eat, and so all of these things are our mind, in a sense. Take a scale, sort of zoom up to another level of scale. Think about how our cities are organized in the physical environment. Research in urban planning has shown that if we organize our cities in the sort of urban sprawl model of much of southern Ontario, you end up with disconnected communities. You end up with people that don't feel integrated into the physical space. They don't know their neighbors as well. They aren't satisfied with where they live. They don't feel as empowered to make positive changes in their society. There's not as much social capital in those communities as there are in sort of mixed-use, more densely organized communities, like downtown cores. Social capital is the foundation of an effective democracy, as political scientists have shown. So mind is urban planning. Environmental psychologists have looked at how our mind, our psychology, our thoughts and feelings and behaviors are affected by many environmental stimuli, like lights, noise, air pollution, clutter. These things affect our mind. They affect our feelings and our thoughts, our ability to focus attention. Green space affects kids, well, and ours, cognitive functioning. So that if you want kids to do better at school, one place to start could be to see how closely that school is situated to a highway or to an airport, and how much ambient noise there is in the background, to see how the classroom is organized, to see how much green space exists in that community that people get exposed to. Mind is nature. So as you zoom out, you start to see mind existing at multiple levels of scale. You take a kind of complex systems approach, and you see mind as a set of interdependent dynamic processes, interrelating at multiple levels of scale. This is what 21st century science tells us. And it's also what our sort of spiritual masters and wisdom traditions have been telling us for thousands of years. From the shamans, to the Buddha, to the great mystics, to the spiritual teachers of today, we get this message of interdependence, of we are all one, there is no self. You start to see that mind, in a sense, stops nowhere and starts everywhere. So wisdom is about integrating mind across these different perspectives, across these different levels. Wisdom arises from the communication from different sort of centers of mind, you might say. I like thinking of wisdom in terms of seeing the whole, seeing the universal, seeing the full, complex, interconnected reality, and also appreciating one's own individual role in that reality. And this dual movement of expanding mind outwards and bringing mind back to the personal exists in pretty much all, again, spiritual wisdom traditions. Many forms of meditation involve an expansion of the self outwards, an expansion of awareness outwards to the universal, coupled by a return movement back to the personal. In Sufi mysticism, you get the terms fana and baka. And fana is the annihilation of self into Allah. Expansion outwards. Baka is the manifestation of Allah through the self, coming back to the personal. In Buddhism, they have said that to meditate is to study the self. But to study the self is to forget the self. And to forget the self is to be enlightened by the 10,000 things. Again, you get this emphasis on personal, on coming together, on integration within the self. But then that allows for transcendence of the self, and the person opens to the world. Why don't we see these other minds? Why don't we experience these other intelligences, so to speak, that are experiencing us? I think it's because simply we don't speak their language. We used to think that animals didn't have minds. Now we know what they do. They can think, they can add, they can remember, they they have emotions, they form relationships. Think about something like whales. Whales live for up to 200 years. They have a complex neocortex that's about as complex as humans. And they also communicate, right? Whales' vocal communications travel through the water at distances of up to hundreds and even up to about 1,000 kilometers. So as a whale is swimming around in the ocean for 200 years, it's swimming around in an ocean of language. Its brain is being patterned by language in the same way that humans are being patterned by human culture. Part of the colonial mentality of centuries past was to see the indigenous peoples that the colonizers encountered as being somehow less than human, as not having the same kind of mind. This prejudice seemed to justify violence, slavery, and cultural genocide on a huge scale. And obviously we see how wrong that perspective was. But it's a matter of, we only see the minds that we're exposed to. There were experiments done in the 1960s and 70s on cats. And they raised cats in highly artificial environments so that cats, and say in one case, cats could only see vertical lines. They were only ever allowed to see vertical lines. The cat's brains eventually only became able to perceive vertical lines because the environment patterns our mind to see the environment. And so then if you put these cats into a normal room, they would only see the vertical lines in that room. Everything else would be invisible. We have been patterned to largely see human culture and human languages and human minds. So how can you apply this kind of perspective? This sort of holistic, interdependent, complex, interpenetrating perspective. I'd like to talk about two things. One of them is well-being. Connect the dots. There's many things that we know about well-being from 21st century science. We know, in counseling, in the field of counseling psychology, when individuals go in for counseling, one of the primary sort of roles that the counselor plays is to help people integrate disconnected aspects of themselves, right? To communicate between the collective aspects of themselves and bring themselves back to more of a unified whole. From a well-being perspective, we know that there are many things that don't lead to greater well-being. Economic growth in first world countries does not lead to greater well-being, whereas moving towards economic equality does. We know that corporate food does not lead to greater well-being, but nutritious food and sustainable agriculture does. We know that rampant consumption, television, and celebrity culture do not make people happier, but being plugged into our communities, finding a purpose in bettering the lives of other people and making the world a better place, does. We know that a focus on individual achievement and success does not reliably make people happier. But we know that learning to be grateful for what we have and developing an integrative practice, like a meditation practice that integrates aspects of the self, rewires the brain to be happier. Let's scale up now and consider macro-scale problems like climate change and biodiversity. These are huge problems that really truly are threatening our very civilization. We are killing off in our lifetimes most of the species on this planet, except the bugs. But we're killing off most of our sort of companion species. We're therefore killing off most of our mind. This results from a kind of development model, you might say, that is disintegrated, where economics has been disintegrated from the environment, and where politics has been disintegrated from science. One way, and I think a place to start in trying to solve the environmental crisis of our times, is to reintegrate these perspectives, to make economics compatible with ecology, and to make politics compatible with science. But in order to do that, we need to, in a sense, change the political system and the way that politics operates, which is reintegrating politics with the people. Because currently, politics is largely responsive to corporate lobbyists. How do you do this? Well, you do this with the social movement. But the social movement has to be integrated into the lives of everyday people, or it won't itself be sustainable. People have to essentially talk to each other. They have to tap into the collective mind, which requires greater communication. Some friends of mine are starting a collective conversation in their own social network. We're calling it the Unstoppable Snowball, trying to figure out how to affect political change for integrated people. I want to finish with just two things. My oldest daughter is 8, and she has connected many dots. She wants to create a society without money. Because she reasons that if there was no money, there would be no poverty. And if there were no poverty, then people would have to work together to give everybody the things that they actually need. Not necessarily giving some people the things that they want and depriving other things of the things that they need. I think this is a very wise vision and a beautiful one. A much more beautiful one than the world that we have right now. She doesn't know how to make this vision a reality, and neither do I. But I think it starts with connecting the dots and then helping each other connect the dots through conversation. So I'd like to finish with a poem by Rumi. He says, "This is how a human being can change. There is a worm addicted to eating grape leaves. Suddenly it wakes up. Call it grace, something wakens it, and it's no longer a worm. It's the entire vineyard and the orchard too, a growing wisdom and joy that doesn't need to devour."